Hi, I'm Robert Levine. I'm here with Andreas Delfs, who, among other things, is the music director of the Milwaukee Symphony and consequently my boss. Most people never get to ask their boss on camera all the things that they wanted to, and I won't be the first. But I will ask him some questions that I've always wanted to ask, not only him, but conductors in general, as well as his thoughts on the industry and the function of music director and related topics. But what I'd like to start with is some biographical information. You were actually born in Flensburg, which, after having done some research last night, I discovered is the second most northern city in Germany, after a town in Sylt.
Oh, that is true. Geographically
Right.
it is, but Sylt is an island,
Sylt
so we
is an
don't
island,
count that.
right.
No, we're always very proud that Flensburg is the most
Right.
northern town in
Right.
Germany.
And it was actually part of Denmark for most of its history, on and off.
It changed on and off. Yeah.
Right.
My grandmother, for example, grew up with 3 different nationalities. She
No kidding.
changed 3 times during her lifetime.
It was also, it's renowned as the home of Elvira Madigan, and it apparently got its start as the center of the European kipper industry in the Middle Ages.
That's true.
I think is a kick. What impact on a musician would be growing up in that part of Germany as opposed to, say, Bavaria, Munich?
Well, what's very particular about the north of Germany is that it's firmly Lutheran. It's a very Lutheran territory. So throughout the history of my hometown, the music that was performed in the 2 main churches was important. Flensburg has about 20 churches, but there were 2 main churches that had both fully state-paid music directors. Kirchenmusikdirektor, same job basically that Bach had. And they did pretty fabulous stuff. First of all, they were all incredible organists. So I had wonderful piano and organ teachers. Both churches had wonderful choirs. So from my very early memories on, I can remember performances of the big Bach Passions oratories and the Christmas oratory and cantatas and Messiah and all of the great oratory literature in very, very professional and very good renditions. First listening, then later singing in the children's choir, and then later, after my voice broke, becoming a tenor in that same choir. So that, I would say, is the most important and really significant influence, because the level of those performances were on the same level that you would hear in Hamburg, Munich, Frankfurt, Berlin, because the choirs were very good and the orchestras were hired from the big cities. The other thing is that Flensburg, being a town of about 100,000, has, like any decent German town, a Stadttheater, a city theater that has a little orchestra, a resident company of singers, a resident ballet company, a small chorus, and an acting troupe. So I grew up with a decent theater where I could see all the magic flutes and all the Hänsel and Gretels and Rigolettos and even Rosenkavalier in decent performances, small scale because the house and the orchestra were small, but very, very well done. So I got to know a lot of operatic repertory, plus great ballets and great plays from a very early age on. And since my mother was and is an actress, I've been a lifelong fan of drama theater and got to know that very early on too.
I wanted to mention that your mother actually has a long list of credits on the Internet Movie Database.
Yeah.
She was very prominent in German television.
She still is.
Still is, okay. Did that have an impact on your thinking about what you wanted to do? I mean, was it...
Not so much. My mother's television career started relatively late in her life. She was on stage all through my youth, and about when I graduated from high school, she was discovered and became a very popular staple of the German soap opera industry. And other than meeting a lot of interesting people that in some way or other influenced my work, I mean, I met some people from the show business industry that some of them were very good musicians and very interesting musicians, and I've always had no problem in straddling the lines between serious music and not so serious music, because I learned early on there's really just good and bad. There is not, a good performance of My Fair Lady is wonderful. A bad performance of the Bruckner Symphony is terrible. It's really just the quality that makes the difference.
Not only terrible, but longer.
That's true.
You went to college in Hamburg and then did a master's at Juilliard
Mhm.
and studied with at Juilliard.
George Mester,
Okay.
Sixten Ehrling, who passed away this past January. The great thing at Juilliard was people came through a lot. So I had master classes with Scholti, with Bernstein quite a lot, because in those years that I was a student at Juilliard, he didn't work so much and he lived around the corner. Karajan came by. It was wonderful because when a great conductor was in town, we were allowed to go to Carnegie Hall or Avery Fisher or wherever, watch the rehearsals. And then that conductor would either come to Juilliard, give a master class with the orchestra, or at the very least sit with us and talk. So that was a great time.
Would it actually be helpful,
Yeah.
what they said?
Many, many times it was. I remember the most intense was Bernstein, because he would never teach half-heartedly. He was such a preacher and such a rabbi that he really... it started normally with an orchestral master class, and then we talked and talked and talked. Then we moved over to his apartment and kept talking till 4 o'clock in the morning. And then the next day we met again to maybe see a performance at Lincoln Center that we then had to talk about again. He was such a cross-connected mind. Everything, whether it was the museum or the stage or music or good food or people, that all connected in his mind to make music. And that was very interesting and very helpful. Others, Karajan, for example, was very helpful with technical details.
Yeah.
You know, was really saying, you know, when you do the recitativo in Beethoven 9, the cello and bass recitativo, watch out for this, watch out for that. You know, here you have to be sure they always be early. Every orchestra in the world is always early here. And when I come to these spots with you guys or guest conducting, always remember, yes, he's right. Everybody does come in early here.
We have orchestra musicians have their own little pet peeves that it doesn't matter who's conducting or what orchestra.
They
this
always
passage
screw up
never
that-
works.
Yeah.
Well, not the conductors, but this passage always doesn't work in a certain way.
Yeah, and for a young conductor, it's not bad to know these things early on, because it helps you planning your rehearsal a little bit, and it helps you to, especially when you're very young, and so you're very nervous when you conduct an orchestra for the first time, and you freeze and your ears block up a little bit.
Yeah.
If you already know 2 or 3 things to say because you have been forewarned, it breaks the ice. It makes you
Right.
relax, and
Right.
it makes you say something. And the musicians, as you just said, know these spots, but at least they will know that the
And
conductor
if
does
you
too.
know what's going to go wrong, it's a little easier to hear that it went wrong, and then you can start thinking about that.
Absolutely.
It's interesting. So from Juilliard, you went pretty much straight to Pittsburgh.
I went to 3 places at the same time from Juilliard. One of the great things about Juilliard is the network of connections, and that they really help you to find your place in the real world. And George Mester was a good friend of Dennis Russell Davis
Who I worked for in St. Paul.
in
actually,
St. Paul
yeah.
with the Chamber Orchestra,
Right.
who hired me right out of school for his present job, which was the Stuttgart State Opera
Right.
in Stuttgart, Germany. At the same time, I got a job. Andre Previn was leaving Pittsburgh, and if you remember, in a rush. So he called Julia and said, "Who do you have? We need quickly a under-assistant conductor." This was called the Steinberg Fellow, and it got me into Pittsburgh 4 or 5 times a year for a week to do children's concerts and educational stuff and covering weeks and so forth. So those 2 jobs plus the Swiss National Youth Orchestra,
Oh, okay.
which I had auditioned for
And that was where?
in Zurich.
Okay.
So I took the train Stuttgart-Zurich quite a
Oh,
bit.
okay.
It was easy.
Right.
It was a wonderful combination of things, because it was theater, it was a fabulous professional American orchestra, and it was working with young people. And these 3 things are still the staple of my work. So it was a great beginning.
Did you have a lot of exposure to Mazzella when you were in Pittsburgh then, or?
No,
I mean,
because
did he become a primary influence for you, or?
later
Okay.
he did. Lauren Mazel, I met for the first time when he was just doing a guest concert in Pittsburgh, which was back then very sensational because you know, he was this world famous maestro, and he hadn't conducted in Pittsburgh
And he was
before.
from there too, actually.
That is
Right.
why he came, because his dad and mom lived in Pittsburgh, and he promised them that he would come. His
And I
mother,
think he conducted that orchestra when he was 12 or something.
yeah, and he was a violinist in that orchestra
Right.
for a
Right.
number of years.
Right.
So, you know, Lauren is an accomplished violinist, and he
Yes.
played in the first violin section for a number of years. And that's how I met him, and then the orchestra fell in love with him, and he conducted more and more, eventually became their music advisor because Previn really had left a void by the abruptness of his leaving. And when he